In 1871, speculators founded a city atop one of the rarest geological formations on Earth: iron ore, coal, and limestone, all within 10 miles of a single railroad crossing. Birmingham grew so fast they called it the Magic City, and by 1907, it threatened to overtake Pittsburgh. That's when U.S. Steel acquired the district's dominant producer for $35 million during a financial panic. Then it imposed a phantom freight surcharge on Birmingham steel, pricing it as though it shipped from Pennsylvania. They starved the mills for decades. In 2023, the last furnace came down. This is how steel built the Magic City, and how one corporation ensured it would never reach its potential. In 1869, state geologist Michael Tuomi walked the slopes of Red Mountain, tracing a thick band of red hematite that ran for miles across Jones Valley. His survey, entered into the ledgers of the Alabama Department of Archives, revealed a rare geological cluster: iron ore, high-grade coal, and thick limestone, all within a 10-mile radius. This was not a scattered bounty, but a concentrated triangle of raw materials, each essential for making steel. No other American city could claim such a combination. The valley's future was shaped by this discovery, not by luck, but by deliberate calculation. The Elliton Land Company, incorporated on January 26, 1871, moved quickly. Their charter spelled out a clear intent: acquire land and build a city at the crossing of two railroads. The North and South and the Southwestern lines, soon to be known as the Mobile and Ohio and Atlanta and West Point, were set to intersect at the valley's heart. This was more than a rural junction. The crossing offered direct routes to eastern markets and the Gulf, a logistical advantage that drew the attention of northern and southern investors alike. Company records show James W. Sloss, John T. Milner, and Henry de Bartoleben pooling capital, cash, railroad shares, and mineral rights, staking everything on the valley's promise. The founders named their city Birmingham, echoing England's iron capital. The name was a signal, reinforced by pamphlets and newspaper ads from 1871, that promoted the three material radius. The pitch was straightforward: iron ore from Red Mountain, coal from the Warrior Seam, and limestone from nearby hills, all within a few miles of the rail crossing. This proximity meant lower costs and faster production, offering a clear edge over established northern steel towns. The Elliton founders were methodical. They secured a 100-acre tract from the North and South Railroad in exchange for a depot and freight concessions, then subdivided the land into lots, each carefully mapped on company plats. The city's first charter, dated December 19, 1871, formalized Birmingham's existence. Legal documents filed that winter laid out a grid of streets radiating from the rail lines, with industrial parcels set aside for future furnaces and mills. The city's design followed the logic of extraction and transport. In early correspondence, Milner wrote to Eastern Steelmen that Birmingham was the only place in America where the three requisites for iron are found within such narrow bounds. This claim, repeated in investor circulars and land sale brochures, drew capital from New York, Baltimore, and beyond. The resource triangle became both a boast and a blueprint, anchoring the city's identity in geological fact. The convergence of minerals and railroads was the foundation for what boosters would soon call the Magic City. By the spring of 1880, Birmingham's transformation was visible in every direction. U.S. Census enumerators recorded 3,555 residents, up from a scattering of railroad workers and speculators less than a decade before. Main streets, once just lines on a plat, now pulsed with wagons hauling ore, coal, and limestone from the hills. The city's population would leap again, reaching 33,452 by 1890, a nearly tenfold increase in just 10 years. The numbers, preserved in census schedules and city directories, tell the story of a place growing faster than maps could keep up. This was the era when the nickname Magic City took hold. The phrase first appeared in the Birmingham Iron Age newspaper in 1881, after a visiting editor remarked that the city seemed to double overnight. Real estate ads echoed the term, promising fortunes to anyone who bought in before the next boom. It wasn't empty hype. The city's early industrialists, Sloss, Milner, de Bartoleben, were not just speculators, but builders of a manufacturing engine. Their ledgers, now held in university archives, show a relentless rise in output. In 1882, the Sloss Iron and Steel Company's new furnace on Red Mountain poured 65,000 tons of pig iron. By 1887, production had jumped to 212,000 tons. Other furnaces, Pratt, Alice, de Bartoleben, fired up across the valley, each adding to the city's reputation as the South's iron capital. The scale of growth was staggering. By 1889, the combined blast furnaces in the Birmingham district produced over 1 million tons of pig iron a year, rivaling older industrial centers in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Furnace smoke hung over the valley, a constant reminder of round-the-clock shifts and the hunger for labor. Every new operation, whether a mine at Ensley, a limestone quarry at Fairfield, or a coke oven at Pratt City, created another wave of jobs. Labor agents fanned out across the South, recruiting black and white workers alike, promising steady wages and a place in the city's industrial future. Behind the numbers was a feverish optimism. Investors from New York and Baltimore poured money into new ventures. Railroad companies extended spurs to every major furnace, their freight ledgers tracking an endless stream of ore and coal. The city's boosters, editors, bankers, land agents crowed about Birmingham's three-material advantage and predicted it would soon eclipse even Pittsburgh. The city's growth was not just in people or output, but in ambition. New banks, hotels, and even an opera house appeared, each a symbol of confidence in the city's destiny. Yet the boom brought new pressures. Housing shortages forced newcomers into hastily built shanties near the mines. The demand for labor outpaced the supply, setting the stage for the labor systems, both free and coerced, that would shape the city's social and economic order. The Magic City's ascent was real, but its foundation rested on the relentless extraction of resources and the constant churn of workers willing to brave furnace heat and mine dust. In these years, Birmingham's identity as an industrial powerhouse was forged, setting patterns that would echo, sometimes painfully, far beyond the city's first golden age. On March 1, 1872, the state of Alabama signed its first convict lease contract with the Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company. The agreement handed over 500 prisoners, almost all black men, to work in the coal camps of Ensley, Pratt City, and Fairfield. For the companies, the cost was 50 cents per prisoner per month. For the men, the price was often their lives. Prison logs from the 1870s and the 1880s record a grim arithmetic. In 1879, there were 212 deaths out of 640 leased convicts at the Southern Coal Camp, a mortality rate of 33% for that year alone. Some years, the death rate climbed as high as 40%, with official reports listing causes like exhaustion, disease, and exposure. Coroner's records from Jefferson County courts in 1882 detailed dozens of deaths within days of arrival, men felled by cold and fever before they could adjust to the mines. The convict lease system was not a side note to Birmingham's growth. It was a central engine. The city's iron and steel plants could undercut northern competitors by $3 a ton, in part because their labor force was expendable and nearly free. Free black miners, earning $2.50 to $3 per day, watched as companies filled the hardest, lowest-paid jobs with prisoners hired for pennies. The state's own annual penitentiary reports, now stored in the Alabama Department of Archives, show that the system was built on a deadly calculus: profit for the city's industrialists, suffering and death for those forced into bondage. This regime of coerced labor, begun in the 1870s, would not be abolished until 1928. In those decades, the lines between punishment and profit blurred, and Birmingham's industrial advantage was paid for in human lives. Payroll ledgers from the Sloss Furnaces and Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company tell the story in numbers. By the early 20th century, black workers in Birmingham's steel industry were paid just 60 cents on the dollar compared to their white counterparts. The wage registers from 1912 to 1925, preserved in the Alabama Department of Archives and History, document daily rates: $1.38 for black furnace hands, $2.30 for white skilled operatives. At the coke ovens, the gap was even starker. Black laborers earned less than $1 a day, while white foremen and brakemen took home nearly twice as much. These figures were not outliers, but the standard, reaffirmed by Department of Labor surveys in the 1920s and union grievance files from the United Steelworkers. The end of the convict lease system in 1928, enacted as Act 218 by the Alabama legislature, forced a shift from state-sanctioned forced labor to an entrenched wage hierarchy. The final lease expired on June 30th, 1928. Companies now relied on free black miners, but the wage gap remained. Plant managers argued that paying equitable wages was unnecessary, citing the nature of the work. Segregated job classifications kept black workers in the lowest paid, most hazardous roles, even as their labor became essential to the city's output. The wage structure carried the legacy of the lease system forward. Instead of state contracts, corporate payrolls enforced the lines of racial inequality. Black miners and furnace workers formed the backbone of Birmingham's industrial machine, but their paychecks reflected a hierarchy built to last. The 60% wage ratio, documented again and again in ledgers and surveys, became the baseline for a new era of economic exclusion, one that would shape labor relations and social divisions long after the last convict camp closed. In the autumn of 1907, as panic rippled through the nation's banks, the fate of Birmingham's industrial future was decided not in the furnaces of Red Mountain, but in the boardrooms of New York. The Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company, TC was the South's industrial giant, yet the financial shock left it exposed. Stock prices plummeted, credit evaporated, and rumors of insolvency reached the ears of J.P. Morgan's syndicate. In a matter of days, TCI's controlling shares became the centerpiece of a rescue plan that would forever alter the city's destiny. The transaction itself was monumental. U.S. Steel, already the world's largest steel trust, agreed to acquire TCY for a sum of $35 million. The deal was structured around 7%, 30-year bonds, issued jointly by U.S. Steel and the Morgan Banking Group. The official prospectus, filed with the New York Stock Exchange in November, described the bond issue as both a lifeline for TC and a strategic move for U.S. Steel. Newspapers in New York and Birmingham ran headlines about the Southern Steel merger, while internal memos in Washington documented the urgency of the moment. President Theodore Roosevelt, wary of monopoly but desperate to restore market confidence, reviewed the proposal in a flurry of correspondence. Within days, the White House granted its approval. The so-called Roosevelt exception, a rare antitrust waiver, was issued, allowing the deal to close without federal challenge. The financial terms, though celebrated in public, were contested behind closed doors. Treasury records and independent appraisals questioned whether TCY's ore and coke reserves justified the $35 million price tag. Some argued the valuation was inflated by as much as 15%, a premium paid not for assets alone, but for control of the South's only integrated steel operation. Yet the urgency of the panic and the pressure from Wall Street left little room for dissent. The legal transfer was completed in November, with TCY's board and U.S. Steel's directors signing off in rapid succession. Minutes from those meetings, now preserved in corporate archives, record the moment when Birmingham's industrial independence slipped away. The consequences of the takeover were immediate and far-reaching. U.S. Steel's acquisition gave it command over Birmingham's mines, furnaces, and railroads. For Birmingham, the promise was continued investment and access to national markets. But the reality, as revealed in later pricing policies and capital allocations, would prove far less generous. The city's destiny was now tethered to decisions made in distant boardrooms, where profit and market share outweighed local ambition. The 1907 bond deal, forged in crisis, set the terms for a new era of absentee ownership, a shift that would leave deep marks on Birmingham's economy, its labor force, and its place in the American industrial order. Pittsburgh Plus was more than a freight surcharge. It was a quiet lever that redirected the fate of Birmingham's steel industry. After United States Steel's 1907 takeover of TC1, the corporation's northern executives imposed a pricing formula that added between $7 and $11 per ton to every order shipped out of Birmingham, regardless of the actual rail distance. Internal rate sheets from the early 1920s, now preserved in the Federal Trade Commission's investigation files, show the surcharge listed as a separate column, a phantom charge calculated not by cost, but by corporate decree. The Pittsburgh Plus system was designed to make Southern steel less competitive in national markets, effectively neutralizing Birmingham's natural advantage in raw materials and proximity. The impact was immediate and measurable. While Gary, Indiana, saw new blast furnaces rise and open hearth converters multiply, Birmingham's ledgers tell a different story. Capital expenditure tables from United States Steel's annual reports reveal that between 1908 and 1914, Gary received more than 7 times the investment allocated to Birmingham, $68 million compared with $9 million. Year after year, balance sheets list major upgrades in the north, while the Southern Division made do with incremental improvements. A 1910 strategy memo from United States Steel's Southern Operations Office instructed managers to maintain the Pittsburgh Plus charge until such time as the northern market share exceeds 55%. The directive was clear. Birmingham would supply the raw materials, but the profits and growth would flow north. The Federal Trade Commission's 1924 ruling laid bare the mechanics of this system. Investigators found that the surcharge had no basis in actual transportation costs. It was a tool for price manipulation designed to steer business away from southern mills and into the hands of northern plants. The Federal Trade Commission's report quantified the damage: $12 million in lost profits for Birmingham area producers over 13 years, and an estimated $4 million in foregone investment in new furnaces and coke ovens. These were not abstract numbers. They represented jobs not created, neighborhoods never built, and a civic ambition slowly strangled by distant decision-makers. The consequences rippled through the city's economy. Local business leaders, once flush with optimism, found themselves starved for capital. Bankers who had financed the early boom now faced shrinking loan portfolios as plant expansion stalled. The disparity in capital expenditures was not just a matter of corporate priorities. It was a policy that engineered stagnation. While Gary's workforce swelled and its skyline filled with steel, Birmingham's mills ran at capacity, but saw little of the surplus reinvested. The city's boosters, who had once promised a southern Pittsburgh, now contended with a reality in which their own fortunes were capped by a pricing scheme set in boardrooms hundreds of miles away. The Federal Trade Commission decision forced United States Steel to abandon the Pittsburgh Plus surcharge, but the damage had already been done. The years of suppressed investment left Birmingham's plants technologically behind, unable to compete on equal footing even after the pricing system was dismantled. The city's civic identity, once rooted in the promise of industrial ascendancy, now bore the contradictions of engineered decline. The evidence, rate sheets, expenditure tables, and regulatory findings paints a clear picture. Birmingham's stagnation was not the product of market forces alone, but of deliberate choices made at the highest levels of corporate power. In the heart of Birmingham's first true boom, civic leaders set out to craft a public image as bold as the city's industrial ambitions. In 1904, the city unveiled its most audacious symbol, Vulcan, a 56-foot-tall cast-iron statue forged from local ore and billed as the largest iron figure in the world. Vulcan was not just a monument. It was a declaration. Standing atop Red Mountain, he looked down on a city that believed its destiny was written in steel. City records from the dedication ceremony show boosters calling Birmingham the Pittsburgh of the South, while newspapers described Vulcan as proof that the city's future was limitless. The optimism was not confined to statues. In 1914, the Tutwiler Hotel opened its doors, its marble lobby and grand ballroom a testament to the city's growing wealth. The hotel's guest books from the first-year list industrialists, politicians, and celebrities, all drawn by the promise of a city on the rise. Real estate advertisements boasted of modern amenities and a skyline that rivaled older northern cities. The Tutwiler became the backdrop for booster banquets and investment pitches, where the city's elite toasted to progress under the glow of electric chandeliers. Behind the spectacle, the numbers told a story of explosive growth. The U.S. Census counted 132,685 residents in 1910, nearly quadrupling the population from just 20 years earlier. By 1920, that figure reached 178,806. Civic boosters published pamphlets trumpeting these statistics, framing Birmingham as the fastest-growing city in the nation. Land companies and banks poured money into new subdivisions, while the Chamber of Commerce issued reports predicting 1 million residents by mid-century. Yet beneath the surface, the city's confidence was inseparable from its dependence on iron and steel. The same optimism that built Vulcan and the Tutwiler also masked the precariousness of prosperity tied to a single industry. For a generation, Birmingham's public face was one of triumph. Columns of smoke rising from the furnaces, monuments towering above the valley, and a population swelling with each new census. The city's leaders believed they had conjured a permanent miracle, unaware of the pressures gathering beyond the reach of their celebrations. By 1933, the optimism that once defined Birmingham had given way to a grinding reality. Federal relief administrators arriving in the city described it as the worst-hit town in the United States, a phrase that landed in government reports and was echoed by national newspapers. The Great Depression exposed the city's dependence on a single industry and the limits of absentee investment. More than 100,000 residents, nearly half the metropolitan population, were listed on relief rolls, a figure that dwarfed comparable southern cities. Reports from the Federal Emergency Relief Administration detail lines at makeshift soup kitchens, families crowded into unheated shotgun houses, and steel workers waiting weeks for a day's pay. Birmingham's labor force, once the engine of the Magic City, now faced idled furnaces and shuttered mines. The city's industrial output collapsed by more than 60% between 1929 and 1932. Relief administrators noted that the city's poverty was not just deep, but concentrated. Entire neighborhoods built for furnace hands and miners were now sites of mass unemployment. Federal surveyors documented that nearly every black household in the industrial districts of Ensley and Pratt City depended on public aid, while white families in Avondale and Woodlawn fared little better. Private charity proved inadequate, forcing the city to rely on federal intervention for basic survival. As the nation mobilized for World War II, Birmingham's steel mills were called to action, but the city's infrastructure lagged behind the new demand. Wartime production orders surged, yet local plants struggled with outdated equipment and chronic underinvestment, a legacy of years when profits were siphoned north. The federal government's own reports in 1942 noted a critical gap between Birmingham's output potential and its actual capacity, citing obsolete furnaces and neglected rail spurs. Relief officials, now tasked with ramping up war production, found themselves negotiating not just with local managers, but with distant corporate boards. The promise of wartime prosperity revealed the city's vulnerability. Decades of extraction had left Birmingham with little cushion, and the benefits of the boom were again unevenly distributed. The city's relief files, preserved in the National Archives, capture a persistent sense of precarity. For many, the hard times of the Depression never fully ended, but simply changed shape as new pressures arrived. The consequences of underinvestment and absentee control would continue to shape the city's fortunes, setting up the next chapter of industrial and social conflict. Steel mills in Birmingham kept their gates closed to change, even as the city became a national symbol of unrest. At the Fairfield Works, U.S. Steel maintained separate bathrooms, locker rooms, and cafeterias well into the 1960s. Pay scales, too, were divided by race, with black workers still earning less for the same back-breaking jobs. Photographs from the period show the reality, signs reading white and colored over every entrance, a physical reminder that the logic of segregation ran through every level of the plant. Civil rights organizers like Fred Shuttlesworth and the Birmingham Christian Movement for Human Rights wrote directly to U.S. Steel's management in the spring of 1963, asking for the integration of workplace facilities. The company's reply, preserved in local archives, cited state law and refused to act. Executives in New York and Pittsburgh insisted that any change would have to wait for Alabama's legislature. Internal memos from the period, now held in university collections, record legal counsel advising against voluntary integration, warning of potential unrest among white labor unions. As protests grew throughout the city, U.S. Steel's Birmingham division held meetings with white workers to discuss maintaining order. The corporation's refusal to integrate was not simply inertia. It was a calculated decision, grounded in the same centralized authority that had dictated pricing and investment for decades. The absence of action from one of Birmingham's largest employers sent a message: the industrial order would not yield, even as the city faced daily demonstrations and police violence. On September 15, 1963, the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church killed 4 young girls and shook the nation. FBI surveillance summaries from that month mention that local white supremacist groups pointed to the refusal of major employers to desegregate as fuel for their violence. The silence from the boardrooms of U.S. Steel was not lost on Birmingham's black community, nor on the national press. In the weeks that followed, civil rights leaders argued that corporate power had enabled the city's resistance to change. The moral and social cost of corporate inaction was now measured in lives lost, and a city's reputation scarred. Birmingham's industrial giants had once promised progress. By 1963, their refusal to confront segregation left them complicit in the city's deepest wounds. Steam no longer rises from the old furnaces on the edge of Jones Valley. In 1971, the final shift at Sloss Furnaces clocked out, ending nearly 90 years of continuous production. The plant's closure, recorded in company memos and city council minutes, marked the first major retreat of Birmingham's industrial heart. 5 years later, in 1976, the Ensley Works, once the largest iron-making complex in the South, shut its gates for good. Payroll ledgers from that last year list only a few hundred names, a fraction of the workforce that once filled the night sky with the glow of molten iron. The silence spread west to Fairfield, where U.S. Steel's massive rolling mills kept running well into the 21st century, but even these giants could not escape the logic of consolidation and global competition. Between 2015 and 2020, the Fairfield Works idled blast furnaces, then halted steelmaking entirely, leaving only a skeleton crew for finishing operations. The physical retreat was written into the city's landscape. Chimneys that once belched smoke now stand cold. Rail spurs that fed the mills are overgrown, their ties warped by decades of sun and rain. In the archives, plant blueprints and faded safety posters bear witness to a vanished world. Yet as the last furnaces cooled, a different kind of campaign took root. Former workers and local historians gathered signatures, lobbied City Hall, and petitioned the National Park Service. Their efforts led to Sloss being designated a National Historic Landmark in 1981, preserving the site as a monument to the labor that built the city. Oral histories from these preservationists echo with a mix of pride and loss, a recognition that while the jobs are gone, the memory of industrial Birmingham endures in brick, iron, and the stories passed down through families. The retreat of steel left behind not only empty factories but also a city searching for a new identity, its future uncertain as the old order faded into history. The last blast furnace at the old U.S. Steel Fairfield Works came down in 2023, its demolition closing a chapter that had defined Birmingham for more than a century. The event drew little fanfare. There were no speeches from steel executives, no promises of revival, just the dull thud of concrete and iron hitting the ground, and a handful of former workers watching from behind a chain-link fence. The city's industrial backbone, once the envy of the South, now existed mostly in memory, and the scattered remnants of abandoned mills. By that year, the numbers told a different story about who employed Birmingham. The University of Alabama at Birmingham had quietly grown into the city's largest employer. Its medical complex stretching across blocks that once held rail yards and warehouses. The university's workforce surpassed 28,000, outpacing what remained of the steel and manufacturing trades combined. Hospital towers and research labs rose where foundries once stood, their glass facades reflecting a city that had traded the smoke of industry for the glow of medical technology. This transformation was not accidental. University leadership, facing the decline of heavy industry, had spent decades investing in biomedical research, hospital expansion, and professional schools. Board minutes from the 1990s onward show a deliberate strategy: recruit top scientists, secure federal grants, and position Birmingham as a hub for healthcare and innovation. The city's economic center of gravity shifted block by block, as medical payrolls and research contracts replaced union jobs and steel orders. The 2023 demolition of the last furnace was a final confirmation. Birmingham's age of iron and steel had ended. The city's identity, once forged in the heat of the mills, now rested in the hands of university executives and medical administrators. The economic realignment was complete, even if the old landmarks lingered in memory. For the first time since 1871, the future of Birmingham would be charted, not by what could be extracted from the ground, but by what could be learned and healed above it. Birmingham's story isn't confined to rusted mills or fading smokestacks. The city's struggle against corporate indifference, racial division, and the scars of extraction remains visible across its neighborhoods and in every new plan for renewal. As global capital and automation again redraw industrial maps, the lesson endures. When distant decisions shape local destinies, the true cost is always borne at home. What future will Birmingham choose to forge from its own steel and memory?